I kept telling myself that the distance between us was temporary, that every couple goes through quiet phases, but lately even the smallest conversations felt like walking through fog. So when my husband casually mentioned that 3 of his old friends would be dropping by, I didn't think much of it at first. What caught my attention wasn't the visit itself but the way he said it, like it was meant to fix something he had already stopped trying to understand. I asked if there was an occasion, a reason, anything that would help me prepare, but he just brushed it off, saying it would be good for the house to have more energy in it. The phrase lingered with me all morning, making me wonder what kind of energy he felt was missing. When they arrived, they greeted me warmly, their confidence filling the living room with ease. They complimented the meal, thanked me for hosting, and treated me with the sort of attentiveness I hadn't felt from my husband in months. Meanwhile, he floated around the edges of the evening, slipping into another room for long stretches, returning only to whisper something to one of them before drifting off again. I tried not to react, tried not to let their friendliness highlight the dull ache of being overlooked in my own home. Still, the contrast was hard to ignore. Every time I spoke, they listened. Every time they spoke, he seemed miles away. By the time I realized I was hosting the evening alone, the air in the house had shifted. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was undeniably different, like something had been set in motion long before the doorbell rang, and I was only now stepping into it without knowing why. As the evening settled into a rhythm I hadn't planned for, I found myself talking more than usual, not because I wanted to but because my husband left me with no alternative. Every time I glanced toward him, he was absorbed in his phone, responding to messages with an urgency he never showed for anything involving me. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me, yet every ignored moment felt like a quiet confirmation of how far apart we had grown. His friends didn't seem to mind his absence, they continued asking questions, genuinely curious about my work, my hobbies, the city, anything that helped the conversation feel alive. Their attention wasn't overwhelming. It was simply human, the kind I'd been missing without noticing how badly. I didn't flirt or encourage anything inappropriate, I only answered politely, though inside I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and confusion. It wasn't their friendliness that unnerved me, it was the way my husband watched from a distance whenever he happened to walk back into the room, as if he were studying us instead of joining us. He wasn't jealous, exactly. It felt more like he was waiting to confirm a suspicion he hadn't shared. One of his friends mentioned how long they'd known my husband, how they used to talk about settling down and building stable lives. I listened, wondering when that dream of stability had turned into a quiet test I didn't sign up for. Another friend complimented how well I handled hosting, which caught me off guard because my husband had never cared for such things. The small acknowledgments made the silence from my own partner feel heavier than anything they said. My husband eventually returned to the table, but his presence only thickened the tension. He spoke to me sharply, as if irritated by how naturally I'd kept the evening going. In that moment, I realized he wasn't judging them, he was judging me, and he had expected the night to unfold very differently than it had. When the guests stepped away for a moment, my husband finally pulled me aside, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the noise of the evening. He asked why I was acting different, why I seemed so comfortable around his friends. The accusation hit harder than I expected because it wasn't based on anything real, it was built on whatever story he had been constructing inside his own head. I stared at him, stunned that he chose this moment, after leaving me to handle the entire evening, to question my loyalty. It felt like he had been waiting for even the smallest excuse to prove some silent suspicion he'd been nurturing for weeks. I reminded him that he invited them, that I had simply done what any host would do, but he didn't seem interested in logic. He looked at me like he was evaluating a result, not speaking to his wife. When I pressed him, asking why he was being so guarded, he finally admitted that he had wanted to see how I interacted with other men when he wasn't fully present. The confession left me frozen. He hadn't invited them for company, he had invited them to test me, to measure whether I still seemed committed to him even when he purposely withdrew. Hearing that broke something inside me. Not because he doubted me, but because he chose to engineer a situation instead of having an honest conversation about how distant we had become. The emotional betrayal wasn't in the presence of his friends, It was in realizing that he had watched me all evening with the intention of catching a fault that didn't exist. And in the strange quiet of that realization, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I had felt more acknowledged in the last few hours than I had in months with him. I didn't say it aloud, but the thought settled heavily. Maybe the real damage in our marriage wasn't temptation, but the loneliness he'd left me in long before tonight. Once the evening finally wound down and the door closed behind his friends, the silence that followed felt heavier than any conversation we'd had all night. My husband turned to me with the same tense expression he'd worn earlier, as if he had been waiting for this moment to confront me properly. Before he could start, I spoke first. I told him plainly that whatever he thought he saw wasn't real, and that the only thing I had done was fill the empty space he created by disappearing into his own insecurities. He didn't expect me to address it so directly. For once, he looked unsure instead of accusing. He asked again why they seemed so comfortable around me, and I answered without hesitation, they were comfortable because I treated them kindly when he wouldn't even look at me. I explained how exhausting it had been to carry the evening alone while he monitored me from a distance like an outsider in his own home. Instead of defending himself, he finally admitted that he had been testing me, hoping to reassure himself that I wouldn't seek attention somewhere else. That admission didn't make me angry, it made me tired. I told him I didn't need attention from anyone else, I needed effort from him, the one person who had chosen to stop trying. My honesty rattled him more than any argument could have. He apologized, saying he hadn't realized how withdrawn he had become, how much pressure he had silently placed on me. But apologies alone weren't enough. I told him that trust can't survive under surveillance, and love can't grow when one partner is busy trying to trap the other into proving something. If he wanted us to move forward, he had to stop looking for evidence of failure and start rebuilding what